It was sometime after midnight when the world finally collapsed around us. For hours before that moment, we had been pinned down under relentless artillery fire. The shells never stopped. They screamed through the darkness and exploded against the frozen earth, tearing the hill apart piece by piece. The ground shook so hard that it felt alive, as if the hill itself was trying to throw us off its back. Dirt, smoke, and fragments of steel rained down into our trenches, and there was no place to hide except deeper into the earth we had carved with our own hands. We believed our defenses would hold. We had built them that way. Interlocking fields of fire, defensive artillery pre-registered all around the hill, a wall of steel that no force could cross without being destroyed. That was the plan. That was the confidence we had clung to. But confidence fades when the enemy keeps coming. The bombardment intensified. It wasn't random anymore. It was deliberate, crushing, systematic. You could feel it in your chest, in your teeth, in your bones. It went on for more than an hour, and then suddenly, the firing shifted. That was when we knew. That was when the fear became real. They were coming. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning when they finally breached the trenches. We never expected that to happen. Not here. Not on this hill. We believed the defensive fire would stop anyone long before they reached us. But somehow, through sheer numbers and determination, they crossed ground that should have been impossible to cross. And then, they were on top of us. Hand-to-hand combat is something no training can truly prepare you for. In the darkness, everything became chaos. Shapes moved where they shouldn't exist. Shadows lunged and disappeared. Rifles became clubs. Bayonets flashed in brief moments of firelight. Men shouted orders, prayers, and warnings that dissolved into the noise. You could hear the breathing of the enemy, feel them collide with you in the trenches. Our lieutenant was in a reinforced bunker, thick walls of timber and earth around him. When the situation became clear, his order was simple and absolute. Hold this hill at all costs, even if it costs your life. There was no speech, no explanation. None was needed. At that moment, a strange calm settled over me. I remember thinking, almost casually, that a lot of men were going to leave this earth before the night was over. I believed I would be one of them. The thought didn't paralyze me. It focused me. Don't be afraid. Don't be a coward. Do your job. Those words repeated in my head as the fighting closed in. I found myself praying without realizing it, my lips moving as my hands stayed busy. Psalm 23 surfaced from somewhere deep in my memory, words learned long before the war. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. The hilltop became a slaughterhouse. Bodies lay everywhere. Pieces of equipment, weapons, and men were scattered across the ground. You couldn't take a step without stepping on something that once belonged to someone. The trenches filled with both American and Chinese soldiers, some still alive, crying out for help in the darkness. There was no time to stop. Survival demanded movement. Hesitation meant death. When it became clear that enemy forces were fully inside our trenches, we knew we had reached the final option. Something drastic had to be done. We called artillery on our own position. It's something soldiers joke about in training, a dark kind of humor. If everything goes wrong, if there's no way out, you can always bring the fire down on yourself. But joking about it and actually doing it are very different things. For a brief second, I wondered if I could really make that call, if I could order destruction on my own men, on myself. The answer came faster than thought. There was no other choice. The explosions that followed were unlike anything I've ever experienced. The sky lit up as if the earth itself was tearing open. The concussions threw men like ragdolls. But it worked. The advance stalled. The enemy was forced back, buying us precious time measured in heartbeats. In the middle of it all, the fighting became intensely personal. An enemy soldier appeared above me, leaping into the trench. I was kneeling, my weapon already raised. I fired without thinking. He collapsed at my feet. I remember the weight of his body as I shoved him aside. The terrible clarity of the moment burned into my memory forever. This was infantry warfare in its purest form. Brutal, intimate, unforgiving. Good men fell that night. Sergeant Ira was killed near the bottom of the hill. A damn good soldier. A decent man. He should have gone home, should have lived a long life. Instead, he was gone in an instant, struck down where he stood. I was right behind him when it happened. We covered him the only way we could. A blanket, his rifle, his helmet placed on top. That was how we left him, a silent marker in the chaos. Those faces never leave you. I still see them. Every day. At some point, the fight pushed us back into the command bunker. From inside, we fired out through the doorway, trying to keep the enemy from getting in. Grenades came next. You could hear them hit the floor, sizzling, rolling among the debris. There was no room to kick them back out. The blast knocked me unconscious. When I came to, another explosion followed. Men around me were down, motionless. A flashlight beam cut through the smoke and dust, searching. I played dead, smearing blood across my face, willing my body to stop shaking. Fear tried to betray me, but somehow I stayed still. The light lingered, then moved on. I don't know how long I lay there, half alive, waiting for either death or salvation. Then I heard something unexpected. Engines, voices, music. Through the smoke and destruction, reinforcements arrived. Greek soldiers moving boldly across the terrain, one of them standing upright in a truck, playing a small musical instrument, as if this were not a battlefield, but a parade. Men were singing as they advanced. It was unreal, and it was exactly what we needed. The Greeks were fearless fighters. They built fires near the front lines, sang loudly, and deliberately drew attention to themselves, baiting the enemy into ambushes. When attacked, they didn't retreat. They fixed bayonets and met the enemy halfway down the hill. I watched one Greek soldier engage two attackers in close combat. He moved with explosive force, knocking weapons aside, overwhelming them with sheer aggression. No hesitation, no fear. They were legendary bayonet fighters, meticulous even after battle, cleaning their blades with care. Their discipline and courage left a deep impression on all of us. The enemy learned quickly to avoid positions held by Greek troops whenever possible. That night, standing among the ruins of the hill we had held, I understood something that has stayed with me ever since. An infantryman has already been to hell, and when he dies, he goes straight to heaven. History is not only written by those who advance, but by those who hold the line long enough to prove that it exists. When dawn finally began to creep over the horizon, it didn't bring relief. It only revealed the truth. The hill was unrecognizable. What had once been carefully dug trenches and fighting positions was now a torn and broken scar in the earth. Smoke drifted low across the ground, mixing with the smell of burned powder, blood, and churned soil. The cold morning air felt heavier than the night, as if it carried the weight of everything that had happened. Men moved slowly, almost mechanically, stepping around bodies, checking for signs of life, calling out names that would never be answered. Some of the wounded moaned softly. Others stared silently at the sky, already beyond pain. There was no victory cry, no celebration. Only exhaustion and the hollow awareness that we were still alive when so many were not. That night changed all of us. You don't walk away from something like that unchanged. The fear doesn't disappear. It just becomes familiar. You learn to live with it, to push it down and function anyway. That's what separates an infantryman from everyone else. You don't just face death. You stand inside it and keep going. As the hours passed, reports came in. Enemy forces had withdrawn. The attack had failed. Despite their overwhelming numbers, despite the ferocity of the assault, they had not taken the hill. They had thrown everything they had at us and still failed to break our line. The realization didn't hit all at once. It came quietly, almost reluctantly. We were still there. Against all logic, against all odds, we had held. I remember sitting on an ammo crate, hands shaking uncontrollably now that the adrenaline was gone. My uniform was stiff with dirt and blood, much of it not mine. My ears rang constantly, a dull, endless sound that drowned out everything else. Someone handed me a cigarette. I don't remember asking for it. I don't even remember lighting it. I just remember the smoke filling my lungs and thinking how strange it was that such a small thing could feel so grounding. Men talked in fragments, short sentences, half-finished thoughts. No one wanted to relive the details out loud, but everyone needed to hear another human voice. The Greeks stayed with us for a while after the fighting ended. They joked, sang, and treated the aftermath as if it were just another difficult night. Their confidence was infectious. Watching them move among the wreckage without hesitation reminded us that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the refusal to bow to it. Later, when the bodies were collected and the wounded evacuated, we began the grim process of restoring the position. Trenches were redug, weapons were cleaned, defensive lines were rebuilt. War does not pause for grief. It demands continuity. But in the quiet moments, when no one was watching, men broke down. Some stared at their hands as if they no longer recognized them. Others sat alone, replaying the night over and over in their minds, searching for meaning or justification. A few prayed, a few cursed. Most did both. I thought about Sergeant Ira again, about his laugh, about the way he carried himself, calm and steady, even under pressure. I wondered how many lives like his had been erased in the span of a single night, reduced to names on a report, numbers in a ledger. That's the cruel efficiency of war. The enemy would attack again. We all knew that. They always did. They learned our positions, studied our routines, and returned with new plans and fresh bodies. But something had changed. They knew now that this hill was not an easy target, that the men holding it would not fold no matter how dire the situation became. And we knew something too. We knew what we were capable of when pushed beyond reason. We knew that when the world narrowed down to a trench, a rifle, and the man beside you, you could endure things that once seemed unimaginable. Weeks later, when replacements arrived and stories began to circulate, that night took on a life of its own. Details blurred. Some moments grew larger than they were. Others vanished entirely. That's how legends form. Not from exaggeration, but from survival. But for those of us who were there, the truth remained sharp and unchanging. We remembered the sound of boots hitting the trench walls, the flash of bayonets in the dark, the prayers whispered under fire, the impossible decision to call destruction down on our own heads. Those memories didn't fade. They embedded themselves deep inside us. People who have never fought in an infantry unit often ask what it's like. They expect tales of heroism or glory. They imagine clean lines, clear objectives, and decisive moments. The reality is messier, louder, closer, more personal than they can imagine. Infantry warfare strips everything down to its core. There is no distance. There is no abstraction. There is only you, the enemy, and the thin line between living and dying. That night on the hill, surrounded by darkness and overwhelming force, that line held. Not because we were fearless, not because we were invincible, but because we refused to give in. And that, more than any weapon or strategy, is why the enemy failed. The days that followed blurred together, each one shaped by the same routine of tension and anticipation. Morning patrols, perimeter checks, weapons inspections, listening posts at night. Every sound carried meaning now. A shifting rock, a cough in the dark, the distant echo of metal. Anything could signal another attack. Sleep came in fragments, never deep, never complete. Even when your eyes closed, part of you stayed awake, alert, waiting. We learned to read the silence. When the enemy was gone, the night felt empty, almost hollow. When they were near, the air itself seemed tighter, heavier, like it was holding its breath. Veterans could feel it before the first shot was fired. Something in the gut warned you that the storm was coming again. And it did. Another night, another assault. Not as massive as before, but deliberate, probing. They tested our lines looking for weakness. Mortars fell in irregular patterns, walking closer, then pulling back, then returning again. Machine gun fire raked the hillside, searching for movement. We stayed low, disciplined, conserving ammunition, waiting. That was one thing we learned quickly. Patience. Panic kills faster than bullets. Every round mattered. Every movement had to be intentional. You didn't fire because you were scared. You fired because you had a target. When they came shouting, voices rising from the darkness, attempting to overwhelm us with noise and numbers. But this time, we were ready in a different way. We had seen them before. We knew their tactics. And more importantly, we trusted each other completely. Trust is everything in combat. You trust the man beside you to cover your blind spot. You trust him not to break. You trust him with your life, without question. That trust isn't given lightly. It's earned in moments where fear could have taken over, but didn't. In moments where someone stood their ground when it would have been easier to run. As the attack unfolded, something remarkable happened. The chaos that once felt overwhelming now felt manageable. Not easy, never easy, but familiar. We moved with confidence, communicating with hand signals and short shouted commands. Grenades were passed down the line. Wounded were dragged to cover without hesitation. This was the transformation. This was what the enemy never fully understood. You can train men to fight. You can equip them with weapons. But you cannot easily break men who have already survived hell together. Each failed assault strengthened our resolve. Each retreat carved deeper into the enemy's morale. They came expecting fear. They found resistance. They came expecting collapse. They found discipline. At one point, during a lull in the fighting, I found myself staring out over the slope, watching flares drift slowly down, casting long shadows across the ground. The landscape looked unreal, almost peaceful for a brief second. Snow clung to the ridges. Smoke curled lazily upward. It was hard to believe that moments earlier, that same ground had been alive with violence. That contrast stays with you forever. War teaches you how thin the line is between calm and chaos. We received word later that higher command had taken notice. Reports described the position as untenable, yet it remained in American hands. The language didn't capture the reality of it. There was nothing theoretical about what we endured. No map could show the fear, the decisions made in seconds, the cost paid in blood and exhaustion. But the hill stayed American. News traveled fast along the lines. Other units heard about what happened, about the stand, about the refusal to give ground. It became a quiet source of pride, not the kind shouted from rooftops, but the kind carried silently in the chest. We didn't talk about it much among ourselves. Those who were there didn't need to. Those who weren't couldn't fully understand. And that was fine. Every infantryman knows this truth. Some experiences belong only to the men who lived them. Time passed. New orders came. Some of us rotated out. Others stayed, continuing the endless cycle of defense and attack. Faces changed. Names disappeared from the roster. New ones replaced them. The war moved on, indifferent to individual stories. But that hill never left us. Years later, long after the uniforms were folded away and the weapons were silent, the memories returned uninvited. A sound, a smell, a sudden noise in the night. You'd wake up with your heart racing, the echo of distant explosions still ringing in your ears. People asked what it was like to fight against such overwhelming odds, what it felt like to face wave after wave of attackers who seemed endless. The answer was never simple. It felt terrifying. It felt exhausting. It felt isolating. But it also felt purposeful. In those moments, stripped of comfort and certainty, everything became clear. There was no politics in the trench, no ideology, no grand speeches. There was only the mission, the men beside you, and the unspoken promise that you would not abandon one another. That promise held. And because it held, history turned, even if only slightly, in our favor. The enemy tried to break us with numbers. They tried to drown us in fire and steel. They tried to erase us in the dark. But they underestimated one thing: the resolve of American soldiers who refused to yield, no matter the cost. That night, and every night after, it wasn't strategy alone that mattered. It was will. It was endurance. It was the unshakable belief that some ground is worth holding, not because it is easy, but because surrender is not an option. If you honor that spirit, if you respect the men who stood their ground when retreat seemed inevitable, if you believe that courage still matters in the face of overwhelming force, then remember this story, because it was written not in words, but in cold trenches, in whispered prayers, in impossible decisions made under fire. And it stands as proof that even when surrounded, even when outnumbered, even when the night itself seems determined to crush you, some lines do not break.